The sun filters softly through the cherry blossoms, their delicate petals swaying gently in the breeze. A perfect spring day in Cherry Grove Park, where children's laughter fills the air like a melody of innocence. But beneath the idyllic scene, shadows stir, unseen and unspoken forces that will soon converge, testing the boundaries of trust, justice, and humanity. Amber Gerwig, a vivacious 9-year-old girl, is at the heart of this story. A story that begins with an ordinary game of tag, but spirals into a chain of events no one could have predicted. It is a story of implicit biases, of fractured trust and unexpected alliances, where even the youngest among us bear the weight of society's imperfections. What unfolds will forever alter the lives of a police chief, his spirited daughter, and a mother desperate to find her missing son. In a world where right and wrong often blur, what does justice truly look like? And how far will one go to protect the people they love? The answers lie within the decisions made in the heat of crisis. When hearts break, truths surface, and courage is the only way forward. It was the kind of day that felt like a gift. Spring was in full bloom, and Cherry Grove Park buzzed with life. Birds chirped from their perches in the trees, their melodies mingling with the cheerful squeals of children darting across the playground. The sun beamed down, warming the earth and the spirits of everyone beneath it. Among the laughter and playful shouts, 9-year-old Amber Gerwig stood out, her energy radiating like sunlight. Her pink sneakers kicked up wood chips as she zigzagged through the playground, her long braids flying behind her like ribbons. "You can't catch me," Amber teased, her voice lilting with laughter as she dashed past the monkey bars. Her friends, Emma and Jack, were hot on her trail. Emma's blonde ponytail bounced as she stretched out her arms, nearly grazing Amber's shoulder. Jack, donning a slightly faded Superman t-shirt, pushed himself harder to keep up. "I'll catch you first," Jack called out, his grin wide and confident. The three friends were inseparable, their camaraderie forged in countless afternoons like this one. The playground was their domain, a world where every swing and slide was a portal to adventure. Unbeknownst to them, Officer Camila Mendez stood at the edge of the park, her watchful eyes scanning the scene. Camilla was meticulous about her patrols, her sense of duty unwavering. But as her gaze landed on Amber, something shifted. A flicker of unease passed through her, an instinct she couldn't quite place. She hesitated before moving toward the playground, her boots crunching against the wood chips. Her presence cast a long shadow over the children's vibrant world. Without warning, she grabbed Amber's arm. "What do you think you're doing?" Camilla demanded, her grip firm. Amber froze, her laughter vanishing, as confusion and fear clouded her bright eyes. "We're just playing tag," Amber said, her voice trembling. Emma and Jack rushed to her side, their faces flushed with a mix of exertion and worry. "That's our friend," Emma exclaimed, her voice shaking. "She didn't do anything wrong." But Camilla's expression was resolute. "There have been safety concerns in the area," she stated. "This is for her protection." Amber's pleas and her friends' protests fell on deaf ears as Camilla began leading her toward the squad car, parked nearby. The playground, once alive with joy, fell silent as children and parents alike watched in stunned disbelief. Tears streamed down Amber's cheeks, staining her pink shirt as she looked back at Emma and Jack. The two children exchanged frantic glances before sprinting toward the white, two-story house with blue shutters that belonged to Amber's father. Daniel Gerwig, Cherry Grove's police chief, was enjoying a rare moment of peace at home when the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Emma and Jack, breathless, their words tumbling out in a panicked rush. "Mr. Gerwig, The police officer took Amber, Emma cried, clutching the porch railing for support. What happened? Daniel's calm but firm tone barely masked his growing concern. We were just playing tag, Jack added, his Superman shirt damp with sweat. She didn't do anything wrong. Daniel's face darkened, his jaw tightening. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and headed toward the park, his mind racing. The sight that greeted him upon arrival sent a cold fury coursing through him. His daughter, his Amber, was sitting in the back seat of a squad car, her small face streaked with tears. Camilla stood nearby, her posture stiff and defensive, as she scribbled in her notebook. "Officer Mendez," Daniel called out, his voice calm but laced with authority. Camilla looked up, her expression shifting as she recognized him. "Chief Gerwig," she stammered. I didn't realize. Why is my daughter in the back of your squad car?" Daniel's tone was measured, but his eyes burned with anger. "She was running around the park," Camilla began, her words faltering under Daniel's piercing gaze. "It looked like what, Officer Mendez? Children playing?" Daniel took a step closer, his voice rising slightly. "Would you have made the same assumption if she wasn't black?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Parents and children gathered at the edges of the scene, their expressions a mix of shock and judgment. Camilla's face flushed as she struggled to respond. "It's not what it looks like." "Then, explain it to me," Daniel demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like racial profiling." The confrontation unfolded like a storm, each word striking with precision. By the time Camilla released Amber, the damage was done. The park's once welcoming atmosphere was replaced with tension, leaving both the Gerwig family and the community shaken. As Daniel knelt to comfort Amber, he vowed to address the systemic biases that had led to this moment. But neither he nor Camilla could predict how their lives were about to intertwine in ways that would test everything they believed. The journey back to Cherry Grove Park was anything but silent. Daniel Gerwig gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as he navigated the familiar streets. His mind raced, replaying the frantic words of Emma and Jack. The scene they had described, his daughter terrified and alone, detained without cause, ignited a fire within him. He was not just a father today, he was also the police chief, and he wouldn't let this stand. The park came into view, its picturesque serenity now overshadowed by the glaring presence of a squad car parked near the curb. Amber's small face, streaked with tears, appeared in the backseat window, and Daniel's heart clenched. His daughter, his spirited, joyful Amber, looked utterly defeated. Daniel parked and stepped out, his measured pace belying the storm brewing inside him. Officer Camilla Mendez straightened at his approach, her notebook clutched tightly. She recognized him immediately, her posture shifting as if preparing for a confrontation she hadn't anticipated. "Officer Mendez," Daniel began, his voice calm but commanding. "Step away from the car." Camilla hesitated. "Chief Gerwig, now." His tone left no room for argument. Camilla complied, stepping back as Daniel opened the car door. Amber rushed out, throwing her arms around her father's waist. Daniel knelt, pulling her close. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured. "Daddy's here." He stood, his protective arms still around Amber, and turned his attention back to Camilla. "Explain to me why my 9-year-old daughter is in the back of your squad car." Camilla fumbled with her words. "Sir, there have been incidents reported in the area. Suspicious activity. I was concerned." "Concerned?" Daniel interrupted, his voice rising. "Concerned about what, exactly? Children playing tag?" "It wasn't just that," Camilla said, her gaze darting around as the gathered crowd began to close in. I noticed something unusual about her behavior. Daniel took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. Unusual, Officer Mendez? Or unfamiliar? Let me ask you something. Would you have had these same concerns if Amber were white? The question struck like a lightning bolt, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Parents whispered to each other, some nodding in agreement, others pulling their children closer. It wasn't about race, Camilla stammered, her voice faltering. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then what was it about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like racial profiling. Camilla opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. The weight of the accusation and the truth within it hung in the air. Amber clung to Daniel's side, her small frame trembling. Emma and Jack stepped forward, their voices small but determined. Amber didn't do anything wrong, Emma said, her chin quivering. We were just playing tag like always. Jack nodded. You didn't even listen to us. You just grabbed her. The children's words added fuel to the fire. Daniel's voice lowered, but the intensity remained. You traumatized my daughter today. Do you understand that? She wasn't a suspect, Officer Mendez. She was a child. My child. The crowd had grown, parents and bystanders alike, drawn to the escalating tension. Some recorded the interaction on their phones, their faces reflecting a mix of outrage and discomfort. I didn't mean, Camilla began, but Daniel cut her off. Intent doesn't erase impact. What happened here today reflects a deeper issue, a bias you need to confront, not just for yourself, but for the good of the community you serve. Camilla's face flushed with shame. She looked down at her boots, the enormity of her actions sinking in. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. Daniel turned to Amber, crouching down to meet her tear-streaked face. Let's go home, sweetheart. Amber nodded, her small fingers clutching his hand. As they walked away, the crowd parted, their silence speaking louder than words. Daniel could feel their eyes on him, their support and judgment, mingling in equal measure. Back at home, the atmosphere was heavy. Amber sat on the couch, her knees drawn up to her chest, while Daniel paced the room. I don't understand why she did that, Amber said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Daniel stopped pacing and knelt in front of her. You didn't do anything wrong, he said firmly. What happened today wasn't your fault. It's something bigger, something that needs to change. Amber's lip quivered. Do you think she'll do it to someone else? Daniel's heart ached at the question. Not if I have anything to say about it. He picked up his phone, his fingers moving with purpose as he dialed. Captain Rodriguez, he said when the line connected. We need to talk about one of your officers. That evening, Officer Camila Mendez sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, replaying the day's events in her mind. The shame was suffocating. She had joined the force to protect and serve, yet today she had caused harm. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she hesitated before picking it up. The message was from her son's school. Arthur's teacher would like to discuss his recent struggles in class. Please call to schedule a meeting. Camilla stared at the screen, the weight of her responsibilities as a mother and an officer pressing down on her. She thought of Amber, her tear-streaked face and trembling voice. She thought of Daniel's words, cutting and unyielding. Her thoughts were interrupted by another buzz. This time, it was a call. She answered, her voice flat. Officer Mendez? The voice on the other end was panicked. It's about your son. The chapter closes on a cliffhanger as Camilla's world begins to unravel, setting the stage for the unexpected alliances and challenges to come. The morning air was unusually still as Camila Mendez stood in her living room, her phone clutched tightly in her trembling hands. The words she had just heard from the school principal echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. Arthur didn't come back to class after recess. We've searched the school grounds, but there's no sign of him. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. Her 5-year-old son, her sweet boy Arthur, was missing. The stark reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave, forcing tears down her cheeks. She replayed the morning in her mind, his tiny hand in hers as she walked him to his classroom, his shy smile as he waved goodbye. She had told him she'd see him after school. She had promised. The scent of coffee filled the kitchen as Daniel Gerwig prepared breakfast for Amber. She sat at the table, drawing quietly with a pack of colored pencils he had bought her after yesterday's ordeal. Though her giggles were absent and her usual chatter subdued, Daniel was relieved to see her creating again. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the sharp trill of Daniel's phone. He glanced at the screen and saw Camila Mendez's name flashing. A part of him considered ignoring it. After yesterday's confrontation, he wasn't eager to speak with her, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Chief Gerwig," he answered, his tone professional. Her voice came through frantic and broken. "Chief, it's my son. Arthur, he's gone." Daniel paused, the gravity of her words sinking in. "Gone?" he repeated. "I dropped him off at school this morning, but now they can't find him. Please, I don't know who else to call." For a moment, Daniel considered the irony. Less than 24 hours ago, this woman had detained his daughter without cause. Now, she was reaching out to him for help. But as a father, Daniel couldn't turn his back on her pain. He understood all too well the terror of not knowing where your child was. "I'll be there," he said firmly. "Stay where you are." When Daniel arrived, Camila looked like a shadow of the composed officer he had confronted the day before. Her uniform was rumpled, her face streaked with tears, and her eyes were red from crying. She stood by the window, staring out, as though willing Arthur to appear. "Camila," Daniel said softly, stepping inside. She turned to face him, her expression raw. "I don't know what to do," she choked out. "I've called the school, the police, everyone. He's just gone." Daniel nodded, his voice calm and steady. "We'll figure this out. Tell me everything you know." Between sobs, Camila recounted the events of the morning. "Arthur loves recess," she said, clutching her hands together. "He's always on the monkey bars or watching the ducks in the nearby park. But when they called the kids back inside, he didn't show up." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Did the school report seeing anyone suspicious near the grounds?" "No," Camila replied. "But there's a wooded area behind the park. He loves to explore. Maybe he wandered too far." Her voice cracked. "Or maybe someone." She couldn't finish the thought, but Daniel knew what she was implying. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll start there. But I need you to stay focused. Arthur needs you." Camila nodded, wiping her tears. "Okay." They began their search at the park, combing through the playground and surrounding woods. Daniel had brought Amber along, partly because she insisted, and partly because her keen observational skills had proven invaluable before. As they moved deeper into the trees, Amber suddenly stopped, her eyes scanning the ground. "Dad," she called out. "Over here." Daniel and Camila rushed to her side. She pointed to a small blue object, half buried in the leaves. It was a water bottle, adorned with rocket ship stickers, and Arthur's name written in neat black letters. Camila gasped, dropping to her knees. "It's his," she whispered, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Daniel examined the area, his training kicking in. "This means he was here recently," he said. "The question is, did he leave on his own, or did someone take him?" Camilla's face crumpled as she clutched the bottle to her chest. "This is my fault," she murmured. "I should have been there. I should have—" "Stop," Daniel said firmly. "This isn't the time for blame. We need to stay focused." Camilla nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right. Let's keep looking." As they returned to their vehicles to expand the search, Camilla's phone rang. She answered quickly, her voice laced with hope. "Arthur?" The response was not her son's voice, but a distorted, menacing one. "Officer Mendez," the voice sneered. "I of your boy." Camilla froze, her blood turning to ice. "Who is this?" she demanded. The voice chuckled. "A friend. Let's just say I've been waiting for this moment. You remember Marcus Fletcher, don't you?" Her heart sank. Fletcher, a man she had investigated weeks ago for attempting to lure children near schools. She had reported him, but a lack of evidence meant he walked free. Now, it seemed, he was seeking revenge. "What do you want?" Camilla asked, her voice trembling. "Simple," the voice replied. "Your resignation. By tomorrow morning, I want your name off the police roster. Do that, and I'll let your son go." The line went dead. Camilla stood frozen, the phone slipping from her hands. Daniel caught it before it hit the ground. "What did they say?" he asked urgently. Her lips quivered. "It's Fletcher," she whispered. "He has Arthur. He wants me to resign." Daniel's face darkened. "Then we're not just dealing with a missing child. This is a kidnapping." Camilla's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the pavement. "I did this," she sobbed. "I made an enemy, and now my son is paying for it." Daniel knelt beside her, his voice firm but compassionate. "Listen to me. You're not doing this alone. We'll get Arthur back. But we have to act fast." He stood, dialing his most trusted colleague. "Terry Robinson," he said when the line connected. "We've got a situation. I need your expertise." As Daniel coordinated with Terry, Amber approached Camilla, her small hand reaching out to touch the officer's arm. "We'll find him," she said quietly. "Just like my dad found me." Camilla looked at the little girl, her innocent confidence shining like a beacon's in the darkness. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a flicker of hope. This chapter ends with the team preparing to act on the new lead, setting the stage for the high-stakes search in the next chapter. The engine of Daniel's patrol car roared to life as he gripped the steering wheel, his face a mask of concentration. In the passenger seat, Camilla was silent, staring out the window, as though searching for her son's silhouette in every shadow. Amber, sitting in the back seat, leaned forward slightly, her wide eyes darting between the two adults. The tension in the air was palpable. Though the sun was setting, casting long golden rays over the streets of their town, there was nothing serene about the moment. Time felt like an enemy, slipping away too quickly as they hurried toward the first possible lead, the park Arthur loved so much. They arrived at the park within minutes, the tires crunching on gravel as Daniel parked near the playground. Camilla jumped out of the car before it fully stopped, her eyes scanning the area. Amber followed close behind, while Daniel took a methodical approach, inspecting the surroundings for anything out of place. Amber tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, what are we looking for?" "Anything," he replied, crouching down to examine the ground. "Footprints, dropped items, something that tells us Arthur was here." Amber nodded and began her own search. Though her small frame moved through the playground almost hesitantly, her sharp eyes scanned every corner. "Here," she called after a few minutes, her voice bright with discovery. Daniel and Camilla rushed to her side. Amber pointed to a patch of disturbed earth near the edge of the playground. Nestled among the wood chips was a single small sneaker, its laces tangled as though it had been hastily removed. Camilla's breath hitched. She dropped to her knees and picked up the shoe with trembling hands. "It's his," she whispered, her voice cracking. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Daniel examined the ground around them. "This means he was here. But where did he go?" His voice was calm, but his sharp gaze suggested he was already piecing together a theory. Amber piped up again, pointing toward the park's wooded edge. "Maybe that way? If someone took him, they'd want to hide." Camilla swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the shoe. "We have to check." The trio ventured into the woods, the dense canopy above them casting long shadows across the narrow trail. Amber walked between the two adults, her small hand gripping Daniel's tightly. Despite her determination, she couldn't help but feel a prickle of fear at the eerie quiet surrounding them. As they moved deeper, Daniel noticed more signs: broken twigs, trampled grass, and a faint trail of disturbed dirt that suggested someone had been dragged. His jaw tightened. "This way," he said, gesturing for Camilla and Amber to follow. After several minutes of walking, they came upon a clearing. At the center lay a small, familiar item: Arthur's blue water bottle, its rocket ship stickers glinting faintly in the fading light. Camilla ran ahead and scooped it up, holding it as though it were the boy himself. "Arthur," she murmured, her voice trembling. Daniel crouched, inspecting the area around the bottle. His fingers brushed the ground, feeling for indentations. "This was dropped recently," he observed. "There's still water inside. He can't be far." Back at the car, Daniel wasted no time dialing Terry Robinson, his trusted colleague. Terry's deep, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Daniel, what's going on?" Daniel quickly filled him in, explaining the situation and the disturbing evidence they had found. Terry's response was immediate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. We'll bring a team and start coordinating a search." After hanging up, Daniel turned to Camilla. "Terry's one of the best. He'll know how to handle this." Camilla nodded, her face pale but determined. "Thank you. I don't know how to do this without you." Daniel softened, though his voice remained firm. "You're not alone in this." While waiting for Terry, Camilla and Daniel reviewed potential suspects. The name Marcus Fletcher lingered in the air like a bad omen. "It has to be him," Camilla said, her voice rising slightly. "He threatened me after I tried to arrest him. Said no one would stop him from getting what he wanted." Daniel nodded, his face grim. "It's a strong lead, but we need proof." Amber, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, what does he look like?" Camilla described Fletcher, tall, gray-haired, often wearing a brown leather jacket. Amber's eyes widened. "I think I've seen him," she said. "At the park. He always stayed near the little kids, but never talked to the grown-ups." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Are you sure?" Amber nodded. "He was there 2 days ago." When Terry arrived with his team, they wasted no time. Using the water bottle and other evidence, they mapped out a radius for their search. "We'll divide into teams," Terry explained, his voice authoritative. "One group will continue combing the woods. Another will canvass nearby neighborhoods. We'll also check any abandoned properties in the area." Daniel was assigned to the woods, while Camilla stayed near the command post to monitor updates. Amber insisted on staying with her father, her sharp eyes proving useful in spotting subtle clues. As they searched, one of Terry's officers radioed in. "We've got something." The team converged on an abandoned shed, deep in the woods. The air around it felt heavy, and the faint sound of rustling inside made everyone pause. Terry raised a hand, signaling for silence. He approached the shed cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, they found a small pile of children's belongings, backpacks, toys, and a torn piece of fabric that matched Arthur's school uniform. Camilla's knees buckled when she saw it, but Daniel caught her before she fell. "We're close," he said, his voice steady. "We'll find him." As the night deepened, the search intensified. Terry's team worked tirelessly, their flashlights weaving through the darkness like beacons of hope. The weight of the discovery in the shed loomed over them, but so did a growing sense of determination. Amber stayed by Daniel's side, her youthful optimism shining even in the darkest moments. "We'll find him, Dad," she said softly. "I know we will." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, drawing strength from her unwavering faith. As they prepared to move to the next location, his resolve hardened. Whoever had taken Arthur would soon realize they had underestimated the people searching for him. The moon hung low over Cherry Grove, casting a pale light that illuminated the quiet streets. Inside the temporary command post, tension hummed like an electric current. Officers huddled around their radios and maps, their faces drawn with worry. At the center of it all was Daniel, his jaw tight, his sharp eyes scanning every piece of the evidence they had gathered. Beside him, Camilla sat with her head in her hands, her knuckles white from gripping the edge of the table. Amber watched from a corner, her small frame curled into a chair, as she scribbled notes into her journal. Her youthful presence was a reminder of the stakes. A child was missing, and the clock was ticking. The sharp trill of a phone shattered the silence. Camilla jumped, her hand fumbling for her phone. The number was unfamiliar, and her heart sank as she realized what this could mean. She exchanged a glance with Daniel, who gave her a firm nod, signaling her to answer. With trembling fingers, she pressed the call button. "This is Officer Mendez." The voice on the other end was distorted, crackling with a mechanical edge. "Officer Mendez," it drawled mockingly. "You've been looking for your son, haven't you?" Camilla's breath hitched. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "What have you done with my son?" "Relax," the voice replied, its tone almost bored. "Arthur is safe. For now." Daniel motioned for Terry, who was already setting up tracing equipment. Terry gave a thumbs up, signaling Camilla to keep the caller talking. "What do you want?" Camilla asked, her voice cracking despite her efforts to remain calm. The voice chuckled, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "It's simple. Resign from the force. Submit your resignation tonight, or Arthur pays the price." Camilla's grip on the phone tightened. "Why? What do you want from me?" "You know why," the voice hissed. "You tried to stop me, Officer Mendez. Now you'll pay the price." As the caller spoke, Terry's fingers danced across his keyboard, his equipment humming, as it worked to pinpoint the origin of the call. "Keep him talking," Terry mouthed to Camilla, his expression tense. "Please," Camilla pleaded, her voice breaking. "Let me speak to my son. I need to know he's okay." There was a long pause on the other end before the voice replied, "Arthur can't talk right now, but if you follow my instructions, you'll see him again." Daniel leaned closer to Camilla, his voice a whisper. "Ask for proof of life." Camilla nodded, her hands trembling. "I need proof he's alive. Send me a picture, or let me hear his voice. Otherwise, how can I trust you?" The voice hesitated, then let out a frustrated growl. "Fine. Check your phone." A moment later, Camilla's phone buzzed with a message. She opened it with shaking hands. The image was of Arthur, sitting on a dirty mattress in a dimly lit room. His hands were bound, and his eyes were wide with fear, but he appeared unharmed. Camilla's breath caught, and tears streamed down her face. "Arthur," she whispered, her heart breaking. Terry's equipment beeped, and he gave Daniel a triumphant nod. "Got it," he said. "The call's coming from an area on the outskirts of town, an abandoned warehouse district." Daniel straightened, his face hard with determination. He motioned for the officers to gather. "We move now. Quietly. We don't want to spook him." Camilla hesitated, clutching her phone. "What if he calls back? What if he knows we're coming?" Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We'll be ready. But right now, Arthur needs us to act." The convoy of police vehicles moved swiftly through the dark streets, their lights off to avoid detection. Amber sat in the back seat of Daniel's car, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and determination. "Dad," she said softly, "will Arthur be okay?" Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his voice firm. "We're going to bring him home, Amber. I promise." As they approached the warehouse district, the team split into smaller groups, each assigned to a different building. The air was heavy with anticipation, as officers donned tactical gear and prepared for the possibility of confrontation. Daniel, Camilla, and Terry's team entered the first warehouse cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily. They moved in formation, scanning every corner for signs of Arthur. In a small office at the back of the building, they found a clue. A crumpled piece of paper with a list of names scrawled on it. Arthur's name was among them, along with several others. Beside it was a map, marked with an X on another building in the district. "This must be it," Terry said, his voice low. "Let's move." The marked building was larger and more imposing than the others, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. The team approached cautiously, their weapons drawn. Inside, they found signs of recent activity: food wrappers, discarded clothing, and a small mattress that matched the one in the photo of Arthur. But the room was empty. Camilla's heart sank. "Where is he?" she whispered, her voice filled with despair. Before anyone could answer, the sound of a door creaking echoed through the building. The team froze, their flashlights swinging toward the source of the noise. A figure darted through the shadows, heading for the back exit. "Stop!" Daniel shouted, breaking into a run. Terry and two other officers followed, their boots pounding against the concrete floor. The kidnapper, a man in his 40s with gray hair and a weathered face, was fast, but he couldn't outrun the determined officers. They tackled him just as he reached the exit, pinning him to the ground. "Where is Arthur?" Daniel demanded, his voice like steel. The man sneered. "You'll never find him." As the officers restrained the kidnapper, Camilla's phone buzzed again. She answered it with trembling hands, only to hear Arthur's voice on the other end. "Mom," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I'm scared." Camilla's breath caught. "Arthur, where are you?" "I don't know," Arthur replied, his voice quivering. "It's dark, and I can hear water." Daniel grabbed the phone, his voice calm but firm. "Arthur, listen to me carefully. Can you see anything around you? Any lights? Anything at all?" "There's a red light," Arthur said. "And I hear something dripping." Terry's eyes lit up with recognition. "The old water treatment plant," he said. "It's nearby." The team mobilized immediately, leaving the captured kidnapper in the hands of backup officers. As they sped toward the water treatment plant, hope and fear waged a silent battle in their hearts. Amber clutched her father's arm, her voice a whisper. "We're going to find him, Dad. I know we will." Daniel squeezed her hand, his resolve unwavering. We're almost there, sweetheart. The car screeched to a halt outside the plant, its towering silos casting long shadows in the moonlight. As they prepared to enter, Daniel turned to his team, his voice steady. This is it. Let's bring him home. The towering silhouette of the water treatment plant loomed against the midnight sky, its rusted pipes and hulking tanks bathed in eerie moonlight. The faint sound of dripping water punctuated the oppressive silence, amplifying the tension that hung in the air. This was the endgame, the moment that would decide everything. Daniel West signaled for his team to hold position. The officers, clad in tactical gear, crouched low behind stacks of abandoned equipment, their breaths visible in the cold night air. Terry Robinson motioned for Camilla to join him at the perimeter. Her heart pounded in her chest as she adjusted her grip on her service weapon. Despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her mind was fixated on one thing: bringing Arthur back safely. Amber sat quietly in Daniel's car, her wide eyes fixed on the imposing structure. Though her father had insisted she stay behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something pivotal was about to happen. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, silently praying for Arthur's safety. Terry's voice was a low whisper as he briefed the team. This is a large facility with multiple entry points. We'll split into 2 groups. Daniel, you take the east entrance with Camilla and Officer Hayes. My team will cover the west. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. Remember, the kidnapper may not be acting alone. Stay alert, and no one moves until we have eyes on Arthur. Camilla swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. The fear that gripped her threatened to paralyze her, but she couldn't afford to falter now. Not when her son's life was at stake. The teams moved in sync, their boots making minimal noise on the damp concrete. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and rust. Flashlights illuminated the labyrinthine corridors, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. As Daniel's group advanced, they came upon a small room with a makeshift sleeping area, a stained mattress, empty food wrappers, and a half-filled water bottle. On the floor was a crumpled piece of paper with crude drawings, including one of a little boy standing next to a tall figure. This was recent, Daniel murmured, scanning the room for further clues. Camilla's sharp intake of breath drew his attention. She held up a small blue jacket, Arthur's name stitched neatly on the inside tag. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. He was here, she whispered, clutching the jacket to her chest. Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. We'll find him, Camilla. Let's keep moving. Just as the team was about to proceed, Camilla's phone vibrated. She answered immediately, her voice barely above a whisper. Hello? Mom? Arthur's small, frightened voice came through. Where are you? Camilla's knees nearly buckled, but she steadied herself against the wall. I'm here, baby. I'm so close. Can you tell me anything about where you are? There's water, Arthur said, his voice trembling. It's really loud and it smells funny. Daniel leaned in. Arthur, listen carefully. Can you see anything else? Any lights, signs, or colors? Arthur paused, and then his voice returned. There's a red light, and a big machine with pipes. Terry's voice crackled through Daniel's earpiece. That sounds like the main filtration chamber. We're closing in. The 2 teams converged outside a massive steel door, its surface marred with rust and grime. Daniel motioned for silence, his hand raised to halt any movement. From within, faint sounds of movement and muffled voices could be heard. Terry gestured toward the door's locking mechanism. It's reinforced. We'll need to breach it. Camilla's voice was low but firm. We don't have time for a slow approach. Every second counts. Daniel nodded. On my mark. The officers positioned themselves, their weapons trained on the door. With a deafening crash, they forced the door open, spilling into the room with flashlights blazing. The scene inside was heart-wrenching. Arthur sat, huddled in a corner, his small frame dwarfed by the industrial equipment surrounding him. His hands were tied, and tears streaked his face. Beside him were 6 other children, their wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Clear the room," Daniel barked as officers fanned out, their weapons sweeping the space for threats. Camilla dropped to her knees beside Arthur, her trembling hands quickly untying the ropes that bound him. "Arthur, it's me," she said, her voice breaking. "You're safe now." Arthur flung his arms around her neck, sobbing into her shoulder. "I was so scared, Mom," he whispered. "I know, baby," Camilla said, holding him tightly. "I'm here now. I'll never let anything happen to you again." As officers secured the children, a sudden noise drew their attention. A shadowy figure bolted toward a side exit, attempting to flee. Terry and Daniel gave chase, their footsteps echoing loudly in the cavernous space. "Stop!" Terry shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The man stumbled but kept running, desperation driving him forward. He reached the exit, only to find 2 officers blocking his path. Realizing he was cornered, he turned to face them, his hands raised in mock surrender. "You'll never stop me," he spat, his eyes wild. "There will always be another." Daniel stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Not today. Cuff him." Back in the main room, paramedics tended to the rescued children, wrapping them in blankets and checking for injuries. Camilla sat with Arthur on her lap, his small hands clutching her uniform, as if afraid to let go. Daniel approached, his expression softening as he looked at the reunited pair. "He's going to be okay," he said, his voice gentle. "You both are." Camilla nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." Nearby, Amber stood with Terry, watching as the children were loaded into ambulances. She turned to her father, her young face solemn. "Did we win, Dad?" Daniel knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We did, sweetheart. But it's not just about winning. It's about making sure this never happens again." As dawn broke over the city, the team regrouped at the station. The weight of the night's events hung heavy, but the relief of seeing Arthur and the other children safe was palpable. Camilla approached Daniel one last time before heading home. "I'll never forget what you did for me tonight," she said. "You could have walked away, but you didn't. You reminded me what it means to truly serve and protect." Daniel smiled faintly. "We're in this together, Camilla. Always." As Camilla walked away with Arthur asleep in her arms, Daniel watched her go, his heart heavy but hopeful. They had won this battle, but the fight for justice and healing had only just begun. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds of the Gerwig household, casting long golden streaks across the living room floor. Amber sat at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Despite the warmth of the drink, her fingers trembled slightly, a remnant of the tension from the previous night. Across from her, Daniel sat in quiet contemplation, his gaze distant. Though they had rescued Arthur and the other children, the weight of the ordeal lingered heavily in the air. In the corner of the room, the faint hum of the television filled the silence. News anchors recounted the events at the abandoned water treatment plant, hailing the operation as a heroic effort. Yet as the words "bias in policing" scrolled across the ticker, Daniel's jaw tightened. At the station, Camilla Mendez sat rigidly in the small conference room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The atmosphere was tense as Chief Reynolds entered, his expression a blend of disappointment and resolve. Behind him, A panel of senior officers settled into their seats, their gazes trained on Camilla. "Officer Mendez," Reynolds began, his voice measured but firm. "While your actions during the rescue were commendable, we cannot overlook the incident involving Chief Gerwig's daughter. The department is under scrutiny, and your choices have raised serious concerns about bias and judgment." Camilla swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had rehearsed what she would say countless times, but now found herself struggling to find the right words. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling, "I take full responsibility for my actions. I acted on assumptions instead of facts, and I deeply regret the harm I caused." Reynolds leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Acknowledging your mistakes is a step in the right direction, Officer Mendez. But actions have consequences. The community is watching closely, and trust in our department has been shaken." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "You will undergo extensive sensitivity training and be placed on probation for 6 months. During this time, your conduct will be closely monitored. Consider this your opportunity to rebuild the trust you've lost." Camilla nodded, her relief tempered by the gravity of the situation. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Outside the station, a crowd had gathered, their voices a mix of anger and hope. Parents of the rescued children stood side by side with activists holding signs that read, "Accountability matters," and "Protect our children." Daniel stepped out of the station to address the crowd. The murmur of voices quieted as he approached the podium, his presence commanding attention. "I stand before you today, not just as a police chief, but as a father," Daniel began, his voice steady yet charged with emotion. "What happened to my daughter was unacceptable, and it's a stark reminder that we must confront the biases that exist within our ranks. But last night, I also saw what true community looks like. People coming together to protect our children, to demand justice, and to ensure this never happens again." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers mingling with murmurs of agreement. As Daniel stepped back, a local activist approached him, extending a hand. "Chief Gerwig," she said, her voice earnest, "your words mean a lot, but actions mean more. Let's work together to create lasting change." Daniel nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Let's make it happen." In her quiet apartment that evening, Camilla sat on the edge of her couch, flipping through old case files. Each page told a story, some successful, others hauntingly unresolved. But one file in particular caught her attention. Her reported on Marcus Fletcher, the man who had abducted Arthur. She studied the pages, her stomach churning, as she recalled how close she had come to letting him slip through her fingers. Fletcher's words echoed in her mind. "You think you can stop me? You don't have what it takes." Camilla clenched her fists, a mix of anger and determination rising within her. She had made mistakes, yes, but she refused to let them define her. If anything, the events of the past few days had given her a new sense of purpose. To serve with integrity, to protect without prejudice. The next week, Camilla attended her first community meeting, held in the brightly lit gymnasium of a local school. The room was packed with parents, activists, and concerned citizens, all eager to share their thoughts and grievances. Camilla took a deep breath before stepping up to the microphone. "My name is Camilla Mendez," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "And I am here to listen." The first few comments were pointed and critical, each one striking at the heart of her past actions. But as the meeting progressed, the tone began to shift. One mother whose son had been rescued from the water treatment plant stood to speak. "Officer Mendez," she could, her voice trembling, I was furious when I heard about what happened to Amber. But when I saw you fighting to save our children, I realized that people can change. Thank you for not giving up, even when it was hard." Camilla nodded, her chest tightening with emotion. "Thank you," she replied. "I promise to do better. For all of you." At school, Amber found herself the center of attention. Her classmates crowded around her, eager to hear about her role in the rescue. But Amber, ever modest, shrugged off their admiration. "It wasn't just me," she said, her voice firm. "My dad, Officer Mendez, and so many others worked together. That's what made the difference." During lunch, Emma and Jack joined her at their usual table. Jack leaned in, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Did it feel like a movie?" he asked. Amber shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It felt real. Too real. But it showed me how important it is to stand up for what's right." As weeks turned into months, the department implemented sweeping reforms, including mandatory bias training and stronger community outreach programs. Camilla became a vocal advocate for change, her experiences fueling her determination to make a difference. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to lead with quiet strength, his actions inspiring both his colleagues and the community. And Amber, wise beyond her years, became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could be found. One evening, as the sun set over Cherry Grove Park, Daniel and Camilla watched their children play together. Arthur laughed as Amber chased him across the grass, their joyful voices carrying on the breeze. "Thank you," Camilla said, breaking the comfortable silence, "for believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." Daniel smiled, his gaze fixed on the children. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. "What matters is what you do with it." As the park lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the scene, it was clear that healing had begun, not just for Camilla and Daniel, but for the entire community. The house was quiet that afternoon, the sort of stillness that comes with healing. Camilla sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of mail, with her morning coffee half finished beside her. Through the open window, the sound of laughter drifted in. She set down the mail, her hands still for a moment, listening. Outside, Arthur was on the grass with Amber, the two of them surrounded by a chaotic arrangement of art supplies, toy trucks, and books. They were mid-game, Arthur giggling as Amber painted a streak of blue across his cheek. "You're supposed to paint the paper, Amber," Arthur exclaimed, his voice a mix of indignation and laughter. "Where's the fun in that?" Amber countered, dipping her brush into the yellow paint. "You said you wanted to look like a tiger, right? Tigers need stripes." Camilla leaned against the doorframe, watching the two. Arthur's laugh was a sound she hadn't heard in weeks, and she couldn't help but smile at the sight of her son, letting his guard down. Amber had a way of bringing out the best in him, coaxing out the joy that had been buried under layers of fear and uncertainty. The transition hadn't been easy. Arthur was withdrawn after his rescue, clinging to Camilla like a lifeline, and shying away from others, even familiar faces. He flinched at loud noises and avoided the park altogether, the memories of his abduction still too fresh. Camilla worried constantly, unsure how to help him move forward. Amber, however, approached Arthur with the simplicity and understanding that only another child could offer. She didn't push him to talk about what had happened or force him to face his fears. Instead, she invited him into her world, a world of games, stories, and adventures. One afternoon, Amber pulled out her favorite board game and set it up in the living room. Arthur sat hesitantly across from her, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of the couch. "I don't know how to play," he murmured, avoiding her gaze. "That's okay," Amber said with a shrug. sliding a handful of game pieces his way. "I'll teach you. We can make up our own rules if we want. My dad and I do that all the time." Arthur glanced up at her, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. "Really? You can do that?" "Of course," Amber grinned. "Who's going to stop us?" By the end of the game, Arthur was laughing so hard he nearly fell off the couch. Amber's exaggerated storytelling, turning each move into a dramatic saga. It was the first time Camilla had seen him laugh so freely, and she felt a flicker of hope. Amber's influence extended beyond the walls of the house. She gently encouraged Arthur to venture outside, starting with short walks around the neighborhood. At first, he clung to her hand, his eyes darting nervously at every passing car or stranger. But Amber kept talking, distracting him with stories about her school, her friends, and her favorite books. One day, she led him to the park. Arthur hesitated at the edge of the playground, his grip on Amber's hand tightening. "We don't have to stay," she said softly. "But if you want, we can sit on the bench and watch for a while." Arthur nodded, his small frame tense. They sat side by side, watching the other children run and play. Amber didn't rush him, letting him take it all in at his own pace. After a while, Arthur pointed to the swings. "Do you like swings?" Amber asked. Arthur nodded again. "I used to," he said quietly. "Before." Amber squeezed his hand. "We can try them together whenever you're ready." It took several visits, but eventually Arthur made his way to the swings. Amber stood beside him, giving him gentle pushes until he was high enough to feel the wind on his face. His laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained, and Amber cheered him on from the sidelines. Their bond deepened with each shared experience. At the library, they discovered a mutual love of adventure books. Amber introduced Arthur to her favorite series, and they spent hours sprawled on the living room floor, trading stories and acting out scenes. In Amber's backyard, they built a treehouse together, hammering nails and painting the wooden walls with mismatched colors. Arthur insisted on adding a sign that read Adventure HQ, and Amber happily obliged. One rainy afternoon, they turned the living room into a jungle, draping blankets over furniture and filling the space with stuffed animals. Armed with toy binoculars, they pretended to explore, Arthur's confidence growing with each imaginative journey. Arthur's progress wasn't without setbacks. Some nights he woke up crying, the nightmares of his abduction still haunting him. Amber would sit with him, holding his hand and talking softly until he calmed down. "Do you ever get scared?" Arthur asked her one night, his voice small. "Sometimes," Amber admitted. "But my dad says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are." Arthur seemed to take comfort in her words, his small hand clutching hers tightly, as he drifted back to sleep. As the weeks passed, their bond began to resemble that of siblings. Arthur started calling Amber his big sister, a title she wore with pride. They bickered playfully over whose turn it was to choose the movie or what toppings to put on their pizza, but their affection for each other was evident in every interaction. Camilla often found them curled up together, sharing a blanket and giggling over some inside joke. Watching them, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. Amber had given Arthur something Camilla couldn't, a sense of normalcy, of childhood. One sunny Saturday, Camilla and Daniel took the children to the zoo. Arthur was hesitant at first, sticking close to Camilla as they walked through the gates. But Amber's excitement was infectious, and soon he was running ahead to see the lions and tigers. At the giraffe enclosure, Amber hoisted Arthur onto her shoulders so he could get a better view. His laughter was so loud that even the giraffes seemed to paw and look his way. "See, Arthur," Amber said, grinning up at him. "You're taller than everyone now." Camilla and Daniel exchanged a look, their smiles mirroring each other. For the first time in a long while, it felt like things were truly looking up. By the end of the chapter, Arthur and Amber's bond had transformed both their lives. Arthur was no longer the scared, withdrawn boy he had been after his rescue. With Amber's support, he had found his confidence and joy again. And for Amber, the experience of helping Arthur had deepened her understanding of compassion and resilience. Together, they had forged a connection that would last a lifetime, proving that even in the wake of trauma, healing and love could prevail. The late summer sun cast long golden rays over the Gerwig home as Daniel stood by the kitchen counter, his hands gripping a steaming cup of coffee. His eyes lingered on the calendar pinned to the fridge, the dates marked with Amber's school activities, soccer games, and parent-teacher meetings. He felt a pang in his chest, one that had nothing to do with the ache that had been growing there for weeks. The call from his doctor's office still echoed in his mind, the words terminal and limited time, cutting deeper than he thought possible. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the present. Amber's laughter rang out from the backyard, where she and Arthur were building what they proudly called their dream fort. Her voice carried a sense of innocence and hope that made Daniel's heart both ache and swell. He had to be strong for her. But how? It had started a few months ago, an ache in his chest, shortness of breath after minor exertion. At first, Daniel chalked it up to stress, or perhaps the strain of being a single parent and the chief of police in a community still grappling with recent events. But the symptoms grew worse, and a persistent fatigue followed, one that even his morning coffee couldn't shake. When he finally saw his doctor, the tests came back with devastating clarity. The diagnosis was advanced pancreatic cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. The prognosis was 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Daniel had stared at the doctor in stunned silence, his mind racing not with thoughts of his own mortality, but with a singular question. What would happen to Amber? Daniel knew he couldn't keep the truth from Amber forever, but he agonized over how to tell her. She had already been through so much, losing her mother at a young age, and now settling into a life where she felt safe and loved again. How could he shatter her world once more? He turned to Camilla for advice. They sat in her living room one evening, after the kids had gone to bed. Camilla listened quietly as Daniel explained his diagnosis, her expression shifting from shock to sorrow. "I don't know how to tell her," Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. "She's just a kid. How do you explain something like this to a 9-year-old? Camilla placed a hand on his arm, her grip firm and steady. "You tell her the truth, Daniel. Kids are resilient, but they need honesty. She'll be scared, but she'll also want to spend every moment she can with you. Don't take that away from her." Her words gave him the courage he needed. A few days later, Daniel sat Amber down on the couch, his heart pounding as he tried to find the right words. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "You know how much I love you, right? More than anything in this world." Amber nodded, her wide eyes searching his face. "What's wrong, Dad?" Daniel took her hands in his, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I've been feeling sick for a while now, and the doctors found something that's going to make me sicker. It's called cancer." Amber's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Can the doctors make you better?" Daniel shook his head slowly, his own tears threatening to spill. "They can try to help, but this kind of cancer is hard to fight. I might not have a lot of time left." Amber threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. Daniel held her tightly, whispering words of comfort, even as his own heart broke. They sat like that for what felt like hours, the weight of the truth settling around them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Daniel started to put his affairs in order, meeting with lawyers to update his will and ensure that Amber would be taken care of. He knew he needed someone he could trust, implicitly, to step into his role when the time came. Camilla was the obvious choice. Her bond with Amber had grown strong, and Arthur adored her. Together, they had become a family of sorts, bound by shared experiences and a deep sense of mutual respect. One evening, Daniel invited Camilla over for dinner. After the kids had gone to bed, he broached the subject. "Camilla," he began, his tone serious, "I need to talk to you about something important." Camilla set down her coffee cup, her brows knitting together in concern. "What is it?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I want you to adopt Amber when I'm gone. She needs someone who knows her, loves her, and understands what she's been through. Someone who can give her the stability she deserves." Camilla's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Daniel, are you sure? That's such a big decision." "I'm sure," he said firmly. "You've already been like a second mother to her. She trusts you, and so do I. Please, Camilla, say you'll do this for her." Tears filled Camilla's eyes as she nodded. "Of course, Daniel. I'll love her like my own." When Daniel told Amber about the plan, she was initially confused and hesitant. "But you're my dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want anyone else." "I'll always be your dad," Daniel assured her, pulling her into a hug. "No one can ever take that away. But Camilla and Arthur will be your family too, and I know they'll love you as much as I do." Amber sniffled, leaning into his embrace. "Will Arthur be my brother?" Daniel smiled, brushing her hair back. "Yes, he will. And I think you two are going to be an amazing team." Amber took some time to process the news, but her natural resilience shone through. She began spending even more time with Arthur, the two of them forging a bond that grew stronger by the day. As the weeks went by, the four of them began to function more like a family. They had dinner together most nights, shared movie marathons on weekends, and even planned a trip to the zoo. Daniel found solace in these moments, watching Amber and Arthur laugh and play, knowing they would have each other to lean on. Camilla took on more of a parental role with Amber, helping her with homework and attending her school events. Amber began to see Camilla not as a replacement for her father, but as someone who would continue to love and guide her when he no longer could. Daniel spent his remaining time ensuring that Amber would have a solid foundation to build her future on. He recorded messages for her, wrote letters she could open on special occasions, and shared stories about her mother that he hadn't told her before. "Never forget how much I love you," he said one evening as they sat under the stars. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Amber. And no matter what, I'll always be with you." Amber nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I love you too, Dad." As Daniel prepared for the inevitable, he found peace in knowing that Amber would be surrounded by love and support. His legacy would live on, not just in his daughter, but in the family they had built together. A family forged through resilience, compassion, and an unbreakable bond. The autumn air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of freshly fallen leaves as Daniel pulled into Camilla's driveway. Amber sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands clutching the small backpack resting on her lap. It was a routine visit, dinner with Camilla and Arthur, followed by a few hours of playtime. But this evening felt different. It was one of many steps toward a future that Daniel knew he wouldn't be a part of. Inside Camilla's house, the warmth of the home was immediately welcoming. Arthur bounded down the stairs to greet Amber, his face lighting up with joy. "Amber, I found a new puzzle for us to try," he exclaimed, holding up a box featuring a sprawling jungle scene. Amber smiled, her earlier nervousness dissipating as she saw her friend. "Okay, but I bet I'll find more pieces than you," she teased, already heading to the living room. Camilla appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Make yourselves comfortable." As the children busied themselves with the puzzle, Daniel joined Camilla in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, watching her stir a pot of steaming soup. "You've made this so much easier," he said quietly, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Amber feels safe here, and that's all I could ever ask for." Camilla turned to him, her expression soft. "It's not just me, Daniel. You've done so much to prepare her for this, and she's stronger than you think." Over the next few weeks, Daniel worked closely with Camilla to ensure Amber's transition into her new family would be as smooth as possible. They tackled practical matters, legal paperwork, school arrangements, and counseling sessions, but also focused on the emotional aspects. Camilla began including Amber in more family activities, from cooking dinner together to helping Arthur with his homework. She took care to give Amber her own space, both physically and emotionally, letting her adjust at her own pace. One afternoon, they went shopping for furniture to personalize Amber's new room. Amber's eyes lit up when she spotted a bedspread covered in stars and planets. "I want this one," she said, running her fingers over the fabric. "It's like the galaxy Dad and I used to look at." Camilla smiled. "Then it's yours. We'll hang some glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, too." For Amber, the transition was bittersweet. She adored Arthur and had grown to love Camilla. But the thought of losing her father loomed over her like a dark cloud. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing together, she turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. "Will you still be with me, even when you're not here anymore?" she asked. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Always, sweetheart. In every memory, every story, and every moment we've shared. And you'll have Camilla and Arthur to remind you of that too." Amber nodded, her tears falling silently as she rested her head against his chest. "I just don't want to forget you." "You won't," Daniel promised. "You'll carry me in your heart, just like I carry you in mine." As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Amber and Arthur deepened. They became inseparable, tackling challenges together and celebrating each other's victories. When Arthur struggled with a math problem, Amber patiently helped him work through it. And when Amber felt overwhelmed by her emotions, Arthur was there with a silly joke or a comforting hug. Their relationship extended to Camilla, who became a maternal figure for Amber. She supported Amber through her grief, encouraging her to express her feelings and reminding her that it was okay to lean on others. One evening, while baking cookies together, Amber turned to Camilla with a small smile. "You're really good at this mom stuff." Camilla laughed, her hands dusted with flour. "Well, I've had some practice with Arthur, but you're making it easy." As winter approached, Daniel's health began to decline more rapidly. Amber spent as much time with him as possible, cherishing every moment. They read books together, watched old movies, and shared stories about Amber's childhood. On a snowy December evening, Daniel called Camilla to his bedside. "It's time," he said, his voice weak but resolute. "Take care of her, Camilla. Promise me." Camilla nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I promise, Daniel. She'll be safe, loved, and cared for, always." Amber held her father's hand tightly, her tears soaking into the blanket. "I'll make you proud, Dad. I promise." Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes full of love. "You already have." In the days following Daniel's passing, Camilla focused on creating a sense of stability for Amber. She balanced honoring Daniel's memory with helping Amber embrace her new life. Arthur was a constant source of comfort, always finding ways to make Amber laugh or distract her when the grief felt too heavy. One afternoon, they built a snowman in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the frosty air. Camilla watched from the kitchen window, her heart swelling with a mix of sorrow and hope. She knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but she also saw the resilience in both children, the strength to heal and grow together. As spring approached, Camilla and the children planted a small garden in the backyard in Daniel's honor. Amber chose sunflowers, saying they reminded her of her father's warmth and strength. Arthur added daisies, his favorite flower, and Camilla planted lavender for its soothing scent. The garden became a symbol of their shared journey, a testament to the love, resilience, and new beginnings that defined their family. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Amber looked at Camilla and Arthur and smiled. "Dad would be happy," she said softly. "He'd be proud of all of us." Camilla reached across the table, squeezing Amber's hand. "And we'll keep making him proud." Together, the courtroom was alive with murmurs, as families of the rescued children, community members, and reporters filled the gallery. The air buzzed with anticipation, a mix of hope and tension. Amber sat beside Camilla and Arthur, her small hand clutching Camilla's tightly. They had come for closure, to hear the sentencing of Marcus Fletcher, the man who had caused so much pain. Judge Martha Reynolds, a stern woman with years of experience, entered the room. The bailiff called for order, and the hum of whispers ceased. Fletcher sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of disdain, though his eyes darted nervously around the room. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he ignored it, staring straight ahead. Daniel's colleagues, now united as a team, filled a row in the gallery, their presence a testament to the bond forged during the rescue operation. Camilla sat between Amber and Arthur, their shared experiences visible in the way they leaned on one another. "The court has reviewed the evidence," Judge Reynolds began, her voice steady and authoritative. "The crimes committed by the defendant are reprehensible, demonstrating a blatant disregard for the safety and dignity of our most vulnerable members of society, our children." Amber glanced up at Camilla, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She squeezed Arthur's hand, silently reassuring him. The judge continued, detailing the impact statements from families, the police reports, and the evidence presented during the trial. "Taking into account the severity and calculated nature of these crimes, I sentence the defendant, Marcus Fletcher, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Some parents wept openly, embracing their children. Others whispered prayers of gratitude. Camilla exhaled deeply, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. But Fletcher wasn't done. As the officers moved to escort him from the courtroom, he snarled, "This isn't over. You think you've won. But I'll find a way. I'll make you all pay." His voice echoed in the silent room, sending a chill down Amber's spine. She felt Camilla's arm wrapped protectively around her, and Arthur buried his face against Camilla's side. Judge Reynolds banged her gavel, her voice firm. "Remove the defendant immediately." A week later, the community gathered at the local police station for a ceremony honoring the officers and individuals involved in the rescue. The hall was transformed, decorated with banners and photos of the rescued children smiling with their families. The mood was celebratory, yet bittersweet, as the memory of what had been endured lingered in the air. Chief Howard Johnson stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying through the room. "Today, we recognize the bravery, dedication, and unwavering commitment of those who worked tirelessly to bring our children home. He called each officer forward, starting with Terry Robinson and his tactical team. The applause was thunderous as Terry accepted his medal, his face serious but proud. Camilla's name was next. She stood tall, her uniform crisp, as she approached the podium. The crowd erupted into applause, but it was the heartfelt smiles from the children she had helped save that brought tears to her eyes. When Amber's name was called, she hesitated for a moment, looking to Camilla for reassurance. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Camilla said, her voice filled with pride. Amber walked to the front, her cheeks flushed but her steps steady. Chief Johnson handed her a framed certificate and a small medal. Amber Gerwig showed extraordinary courage and quick thinking, playing a pivotal role in solving this case. We owe her a debt of gratitude. The room rose to its feet, the applause and cheers filling the space. Amber glanced at Arthur, who gave her a thumbs up from his seat. Her smile widened, her confidence blooming in the warmth of the moment. In the months following the trial, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Amber and Arthur. Camilla officially adopted Amber, and the paperwork symbolized more than legal guardianship. It solidified their bond as a family. Amber's room in Camilla's house became her sanctuary, filled with photos of her father, Daniel, alongside new memories with Camilla and Arthur. She often sat at her desk, journaling her thoughts and dreams, knowing her father's legacy lived on in her determination to be strong and compassionate. Arthur and Amber became inseparable, their sibling-like relationship bringing joy and healing to their lives. Whether it was building tree forts in the backyard, racing bicycles down the quiet streets, or tackling homework together, their laughter was a constant reminder of the resilience of children. One sunny afternoon, Camilla, Amber, and Arthur worked together in the backyard, planting flowers in the small memorial garden they had created for Daniel. Amber chose sunflowers, her father's favorite, while Arthur picked daisies for their simplicity and cheerfulness. Camilla added lavender, its calming scent wafting through the air. As they finished, Amber placed a small plaque in the center of the garden. It read, "In loving memory of Chief Daniel Gerwig, a father, a friend, and a protector. Your light guides us always." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, their hands joined. Amber looked up at Camilla. "He would have liked this, wouldn't he?" Camilla nodded, her voice soft. "He would have loved it. And he'd be so proud of you, Amber." The following year, Amber and Arthur returned to Cherry Grove Park, this time with Camilla. They watched the other children play, their laughter filling the air. Amber spotted a girl sitting alone by the swings, much like Arthur had been months ago. "Should we invite her to play?" Amber asked Arthur. Arthur nodded eagerly, already heading over. "Hi, want to join us?" The girl's face lit up, and she followed them to the slide. Camilla watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. She knew Daniel's influence would continue to guide them, shaping their futures in ways both big and small. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, Camilla called to the children. They ran to her, their faces flushed with joy. Together they walked home, their laughter trailing behind them like a melody. Amber glanced at Camilla and Arthur, her heart full. This was her family, a family built on love, resilience, and the lessons of the past. And as they stepped into the future, she knew they would face it together. As we come to the end of Amber and Arthur's journey, we're reminded of the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the bonds that form, even in the hardest of times. What moment in this story moved you the most? Was it Amber's courage, Camilla's transformation, or the unbreakable love of a father determined to protect his daughter? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what resonated with you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is just one of the many inspiring stories we have to share. Stick around, because our next story will take you on another emotional journey that you won't want to miss. Let's keep celebrating the moments that connect us and remind us of the strength we all carry within. See you next time. Star.